red button which indicates the session is currently being recorded. I wanted to thank you for joining this webinar and also encourage you to become a member of CPF and enjoy the benefits and discounts that come with membership. Information on membership can be found on our website at californiapreservation.org. The California Preservation Foundation is a membership-based, not-for-profit organization whose mission is to provide statewide leadership in education and advocacy to ensure protection of historic resources in California. The format for today's webinar will consist of 3 presenters, each speaking for approximately 20 to 25 minutes. We will close with a 10 to 15 minute question and answer period. You'll notice that there's a question and answer box on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, you may type it in the box and we will hold that question until it can be addressed by a speaker. You'll also see that there's a chat box right above the Q&A box. The chat box is visible to all participants. If you would like to comment or interject at any time, you may do so through the chat box, but note that everybody can see it. If you are attached to a microphone, you will need to grant Adobe Connect voice access to your microphone when asked to do so. Your voice will be muted during most of the presentation, but you may raise your hand by clicking on the hand symbol at the top of your screen, somewhat in the center of the screen, which will alert us that you have a question. Once your hand is raised, we will grant you voice access at an appropriate time in the presentation, and this will allow you to have a short dialogue with the speakers or ask a question in person. If for some reason your sound does not work, you will need to type in your question or response in the chat box. I'm now going to briefly introduce our 3 speakers in the order of their presentations. Megan Brown is the CLG coordinator for the National Park Service. Megan will review the history and impact of the CLG program on communities and describe the role of the National Park Service. Shannon Lochner, Historian 2 with the Local Government Unit at the California Office of Historic Preservation, will cover the SHPO's role, how CLG status impacts California communities, and look at the typical CLG in the state, offering a broad overview of the application and approval process. Ken Lyon, the Associate Planner for the City of Palm Springs, will close the presentations with his perspective of the Palm Springs process, and which culminated in their approval as a certified local government last year in 2014. What I'm going to do right now is briefly mute all participants so your voice is not being broadcast during the presentation. Once I've done that, we can begin with Megan.
Okay, are we
okay,
ready?
Megan, you're ready to begin.
Great. Good afternoon for me, a little earlier for you guys on the West Coast. My name is Megan Brown. I'm the Certified Local Government Coordinator for the entire country. So there's about 1,907 CLGs across the country. We're going to talk a little bit about what all is involved in being a part of one of those today. I have developed a bit of a cold, so you guys excuse me if my voice is a little weird. But one of the things I just wanted to kind of get started with is, some of you may be aware, some of you may not, but the National Park Service will be celebrating its 100th birthday in 2016. And one of the major goals that we have as part of the cultural resource staff is to teach not only our brothers and sisters at the Park Service, but the rest of the world, that there's more to the Park Service than the big natural parks, and that's involving the cultural resources. So just to get us kicked off here, I have a little video from the National Park Service Director, Jonathan Jarvis, that I wanted to show you guys really quickly.
Hi, I'm John Jarvis, Director of the National Park Service. In 2016, the National Park Service celebrates its first 100 years, a milestone that is not just about parks, about the successful partnerships we have with you. I welcome and encourage all cultural resource partners to participate in the Centennial. so that together we can connect with and create the next generation of park visitors, supporters, advocates. Our work together ensures that communities preserve and protect what is to them, and that cultural resource professionals have the tool and guidance they need. With your help, we can ensure that the next 100 years continue to engage communities in preservation, protection, and education of America's cultural heritage.
Okay, then we can switch over to the PowerPoint. But I want you guys to know that that's something we're working on, and one of the things that will be available to you is use of the Centennial logo. Oops, there it is. Sorry. There we go. So you may be seeing some more information coming out, probably through your CLG coordinators in the state, as well as from the National Park Service. But we consider our CLGs our local partners, and so there will be opportunity for you guys to participate in the Centennial, to use the logo on any projects that you do, and that type of branding situation. So just know that that's coming. I just want to give a little shout out for that. So let's get started into this presentation. There's a lot of reasons why we do historic preservation, and I like to think that at the local level is where all those different reasons come together. Some people do preservation because they think it's green. Some do it to help their tourism and economics. Others do it for smart growth, and some do it just because they're building huggers, and that's okay. But at the local level, and especially on your preservation commissions, is where all those interests come together to support historic preservation. Now, one thing I don't think we're trying to do, at least not yet, is save one of these. This could be anywhere in the world, and you've never heard anyone say, I had lunch at the cutest little strip mall. So what we are trying to preserve is the special places that you have in your community that make you unique and make you not like any other place in the country. And that's what's important. So I wanted to just begin by a brief overview of the world of preservation in our country. And I think that can get really confusing for people at the local level because everything has a name that sounds like the other. So we've got National Trust, National Main Street Center, the National Register, the National Park Service. You know, what are all these groups and what do they do? Well, a big important part of preservation in the United States is the private sector, and that's where preservation really began. And at the top of that, at national level, it's the National Trust for Historic Preservation, and they're the national nonprofit leaders. They were chartered by Congress, and now they are officially all nonprofit. There's also another group in Washington called Preservation Action, and they're more of a lobbying group. So they're on the Hill fighting for funding, things like that. So just an organization for you to be aware of. The National Main Street Center used to be part of the National Trust. It recently spun off and is now based in Chicago. Main Street is a wonderful partner for Preservation Commission, so I encourage you to look at their resources. They have a national conference. This year will be at the end of March in Atlanta, and that's something I always strongly encourage preservation commissioners to go to as well. A lot of good energy there. And the last one at the national level is the National Alliance Preservation Commissions. And if you aren't aware of that organization, that's definitely something you need to be, because they're a national group if you're on a preservation commission. I'll talk a little bit more about them throughout the presentation. At the state level, you have your statewide preservation organizations like the California Preservation Foundation. You also have heritage area programs that may be on the private side. And then at the local level, you may have local nonprofits that you work with. Many of the larger cities have those. Also, your Main Street organizations are usually a nonprofit type of situation, and other groups like that. So those are kind of the partners that we all work with. Now, I mentioned NAPC, or the National Alliance. They're now based in Norfolk, Virginia, and this is the National Organization for Preservation Commissions. Every other year, they do a forum conference. This year, or I'm sorry, next year, 2016, will be in Mobile, Alabama in July, so it'll be nice and cool there. But it's a great meeting. Literally all Preservation Commission folks, it's staff and commissioners, learning from each other. It's not a lot of talking heads talking down to people, telling them how to do things. It's people at the local level teaching each other how to do things. So if you haven't been to one of these meetings, I strongly encourage it. A lot of the SHPOs will give scholarships through their CLG funding to attend this. So definitely look at that as an option. So that's the private side. The public side is kind of led by the National Park Service, and we are the federal agency that's tasked with the federal running the Federal Preservation Program. Also, there's the Advisory Council for Preservation, Historic Preservation. They're a smaller agency, and their intention is to advise the president on historic preservation issues throughout the country. They work mainly with Section 106, if you've heard of that, and also with the federal agencies to make sure they're taking care of their cultural resources as well. We also have about 150 tribal historic preservation offices throughout the country. They're a little bit similar to your state preservation office. And then every federal agency also has a federal preservation officer. And that's something a lot of people don't know. So if you're having a particular issue with a federal preservation, a federal agency, know that there is someone at that agency that's in charge of cultural resources for them. Then at the state level, you have the state historic preservation offices, and I really like to say that they're the backbone of the preservation movement. Without them, things wouldn't happen. The National Park Service tasks each state with running a lot of programs for us, and one of those is the Certified Local Government Program. So often the state office is going to be your first stop for any type of assistance. You also have Main Street coordinating programs, similar to your state offices, but a very good place for resources. Then at the local level are all of y'all, the local preservation commissions. Some of you have elected to become a CLG, and we're excited to have you as part of the program. Some of you haven't yet, and we do hope that you'll join us. So that's kind of an overview of where preservation sits in our country. Now, there's always going to have to be some laws and designations and regulations and things like that to guide what we do. And I just want to touch on that briefly. For the Federal Preservation Program, our guidance comes from the National Historic Preservation Act. And that was created in 1966. So you can see we also have another anniversary coming up in 2016, which is 50 years for the National Historic Preservation Act. It created the National Register. It creates what we call Section 106 review. If you're not familiar with that, it basically says that there has to be a review if there's federal involvement that affects historic resources. And it established the system of state historic preservation offices. Later on, the Act is amended to create some other programs like the Historic Preservation Fund, the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, the tax incentive programs, and then the Certified Local Government Program. So I just want you to understand where these entities come from. As far as regulation and guidance, one of the things that you probably heard of the most is the standards. Everybody says the standards. Usually that's just the treatment standards, the rehabilitation standards, and that might be what's in your ordinance, what you use as a commission to make decisions on. But one thing I like to kind of expand your knowledge on is that there are many, many sets of standards that the Park Service produces, and those are all part of the Secretary of Interior's Standards for Archaeology and Historic Preservation. And you can see here all the different areas that we provide guidance in. So if you're doing preservation planning, or you're going out and doing a survey, perhaps you're looking at hiring a professional, we have standards to help guide you in all of those choices and decisions. So do be aware that we go a little bit past the treatment side of things. Do we have any questions at this point? We can save them till the end, or I just like to show off my Park Service uniforms that I've collected pictures of. Okay.
Megan, I don't see any questions here, but I will also note that somebody asked about the PDF handout for this presentation and the rest of the presentations, and I just posted the link in the chat box in case anybody needs it.
Great. Okay, we will keep going then. So I mentioned quickly the Historic Preservation Act and and we're going to talk about how did the CLG program come to be. The Act in '66 created the partnership between the federal government and the state government. However, we realized later that we had left out probably the most important partner, I think, which was the local level. Preservation in our country really happens at the local level. That's where the rubber meets the road. And so in 1980, the Act was amended to include the CLG program. Any general purpose political subdivision of the state can be certified. So you will see that there's a multitude of different types of communities from cities, boroughs, villages, counties, parishes, etc. I've got sun coming through on my face. It looks kind of funny on the camera. Let's see. Okay. So there are several things that we ask in order for you to become a CLG. And the most important thing is that your community is making a local commitment to do historic preservation. And we do expect you to honor that commitment in that capacity. You become a local partner with us in the state, in the program. We do have some minimum standards that we're going to talk about, both from the federal level and the state. And but the thing everybody really wants to know about is the money. It does open you up to some grant funding, but I think even more importantly, the technical assistance that's available. Participation in the National Register process, and then consulting party status for Section 106. These are all the things we're going to touch on real quickly right now. To give you an idea though, 1,907 communities across the country. You can see how they're kind of spread out. You can also see the differences in size from some being large counties out west to smaller cities. And you can see kind of where California sits in that scheme. Our website, nps.gov/CLG, is pretty new, and we're working on improvements now for it to provide you with more information. But there's good basic information on the CLG program. We also provide contact information there for your state coordinator. In California, you divide up duties, so you kind of have a regional person. I'll let Shannon talk more about that. But also you can find the contact information there for any of the CLGs. So if you know of a neighboring community or community in another state that's doing something interesting, you want to get in touch with them, here's a good way to find that. We also provide some statistics on the screen on the website, and you can see those here. Whoops, I'm trying to use my fancy arrows here. This type of information that you can find on our website as well. Oftentimes, every year we ask for some information from our certified local governments, and in California that's done through your annual report that you provide to the state. But some of that information they are then asked to share on with the National Park Service, and we use that for national reporting. So that gives us a good idea of what's being accomplished across the country, and that's pretty amazing actually when we put it all together. Now, with any program with incentives comes some regulations, a little bit of red tape, but not too bad. So I want to just kind of share with you guys what that is all about. Okay, so I spoke before about those minimum federal requirements, and these are the 4 things that we're going to ask of any certified local government when they come on board with the program. First, they have to establish a Historic Preservation Commission, and that needs to be a qualified Historic Preservation Commission. So members of the community that have certain skills that could be defined by the state office. You may request that you have an architect on board or a historian or archaeologist or something of that. But they need to be at least members that have a demonstrated interest in preservation. The other thing the commission does is perhaps you don't have an archaeologist that wants to serve on your commission in your community. But by saying that you're going to be a CLG, you make the commitment to seeking out that expert advice if you need it, so that if you had a big decision come before your community that you needed the expertise of an archaeologist, you're telling us at the Park Service in the state that you're willing to go out and get that expertise and not just make a decision in kind of a vacuum. An informed decision is what we're looking for. One of the other major things we ask for is that you enforce any relevant state and local laws. So if you have state preservation laws, or if you have local ordinance and local design review, then we do expect you to follow those laws. Some communities do not adopt local design review, and so you'll see all over the country the CLG program presents itself kind of differently. So some states require that design review be part of their CLG program, however some don't. So just be aware of that. But if you do have the laws, we do expect you to enforce them. We also ask that every CLG maintain a survey and an inventory of what's in their community. Now, that's not just the properties that you've designated. It's an active inventory that you should be adding to regularly, and that needs to be stored in a public place. The idea being that you're going to be providing information to the public on the historic resources, because we do expect you to be kind of the public arm of the preservation program. I'm going to move a little bit so that sun is not in my face. Okay. And then to kind of follow up on that, the last thing that we really expect of a certified local government is that you are the public arm of preservation in your community. So you're providing an avenue for public participation. You're having open meetings. You're following your meeting procedures. You're participating in the National Register process. And really, you're kind of the vehicle for the dissemination of information throughout your community. The last thing that we ask is that any other responsibilities that the state office chooses to pass on to their CLGs, that you also meet those requirements. And this is done through a document that we call your state procedures. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So I've mentioned the role in the National Register Domination a couple times. This is actually written into the amendment and the language in our regulations. And basically what it says is that the commission and the chief elected official for a community have the right to decide if a property should move on to be listed in the National Register. If for some reason both the elected official and the commission feel that a property is not eligible for the register, they may stop the nomination process at that point. The only way it could go forward is on appeal. So when the state office is asking you as a commission to comment on these nominations, this is an important part of the partnership process, and we do want you guys to take that seriously and provide comments. And that's often when we learn some really good information about those properties by getting your local input on them that we might not have known prior to that. The other thing just to be aware of, Section 106 could be a whole nother webinar in itself, but it is a portion of the Act, Section 106 of the Act, so not a very exciting name. But basically, if a federal agency is having impact, be it a road project, a bank permit, funding, even preservation funding, that federal agency should be communicating with the CLG and the commission as an interested party. If the CLG feels like this project is pretty significant, maybe they're widening your Main Street in your historic downtown district, you can request to become a consulting party. And we do a really good training on this that we've been putting out to some of the states. So if that's something you're interested in, get in touch with your state coordinator and we can share that with you. But just know that it's out there. That's kind of what this is for, just a quick overview. Now, the thing most people want to know about are the incentives, and there is grant funding, there is technical assistance. I like to think about there is a special pot of money only CLGs have access to, but also you kind of have the bat line. You know, you get to call in to the state office or to the Park Service, and you're our local partner, so we really sit up and pay attention to that. So I think you get a little step up there, the secret back door. Now, the funding that is available to CLGs comes from the Historic Preservation Fund. And I've provided a copy of our annual report that we do here with a link to it so you can look at it online. The funding for this comes from offshore oil lease revenue. So this is not tax dollars. The fund is authorized at $150 million every year. However, the most we've ever received out of it was about $70 million. This funding is divided up amongst the states and the tribal historic preservation offices. And I guess the best way to think of it is a block grant. And from that block grant that each state receives, they are required to give 10% of that funding to certified local governments. If they do not spend that 10%, then the Park Service recaptures it and takes it back. So it's very important, A, that the states are getting that money out to you, B, that you, the CLGs, are spending that money. We don't want it back. It goes back to the Treasury and we can't use it. And that makes us very unhappy. So I want you to be aware of that. I like for you to know where that funding is coming from, that it is not tax dollars, and to also know that if the fund ever goes up over 65 million to the states, all the funding over 65 million, half of that excess would go directly to local governments. So that would be a wonderful incentive to increase the amount of funding that we're getting and hopefully support the communities more throughout the country. So what can you spend that money on? The CLG program is really very flexible. We give a long list of things that we can't pay for, but that means there's some creativity in what we can pay for. This is just kind of a list of items that we often see. Some states do restrict the funding to planning dollars and don't do bricks and mortar, and California is one of those states. And every state is allowed to make those recommendations or set priorities that they want in their funding. So one year maybe California decides that they want to focus on survey. So they could fund surveys throughout the country, or maybe training, and they want to set aside some dollars for that. So just be aware of that. But basically, if you can dream it up and it relates to the preservation of historic properties above or below ground, there's probably a way that we can use CLG funding with it. Any other questions at this point? Looks like no. All right, we're going to keep going.
I don't see any.
So now for the fun part, we're going to just talk a little bit about CLG success stories from across the country. And what I'm hoping is this will kind of give you guys some ideas of things to apply for grants for if you want to. One of the things that we encourage all communities to have is a preservation plan. And if you don't have one, that would be a great use for a CLG grant. This gives your community direction. It gives you something to show funders. It gives you something to show City Council that these are your plans for the community moving forward. Here are just a few examples of some of those plans that are out there. DC has just done a really nice local preservation plan. It's beautiful. It has lots of drawings and really captures the attention. And then Pueblo, Colorado, which is down here, they have a really nice local preservation plan that ties into their state preservation plan really well. So I wanted you guys to be aware of those as resources. And then there's a lot of really creative projects going on throughout the country. And this is one in Alexandria, Virginia, which is actually where I live. And it's creating a digital collector app. And basically the idea was to go out and do survey on a tablet instead of on paper, and that would go directly into their database. Alexandria really embraced the fact that they had the third oldest historic district in the country, actually, that had never had a full intensive survey. They also have about 4,000 C of A's every year that they have to review. And being that everything in Alexandria, as you can see, is so close to the street, the level of detail for them is very important, down to what type of glass and things that are in it. So they didn't want to do this on paper yet again. They wanted to use new technology. So in working with a CLG grant with the Virginia SHPO, they have developed this collector tool that looks something like this. And you actually, with the tablet, go around and survey properties. I actually volunteered for the project. It had been a while since I did surveys, so I thought that would be a good idea. But they're building this in a way that hopefully it can be shared with any community. So we're continuing to find more partners. The Vermont SHPO is our newest partner on this. And so you can see that over the summer, with 40 volunteers, only on the weekends in 3 months, they were able to intensively survey 400 properties. And this all went directly into their database, and then it was electronically shared with the state office. So this is a really cool project. If any of you guys are interested in learning more, just let me know, because we're looking for people to work with us on it. Another fun example, and it can't get more fun than a helicopter, is a Section 106 project coming out of Iowa. This is the Hale Bridge Airlift, and it involved a partnership between the Commission, the National Guard, and the Preservation Commission really wanted to save this bridge that DOT shockingly had no use for, right? And so in using this as a training exercise, the Iowa National Guard lifted the 3 sections of the bridge over to the state park in the county. It's now the entry to their state park, and every year they have a dinner on the bridge to celebrate it. And you can imagine it was quite the public event. People came out to watch the bridge be lifted, and it's just it's a great win-win. At $450,000, not a horribly expensive project. So we have another program that we work very closely with in the Park Service, and it's Youth Summits. This is largely coming out of Denver, Colorado, but a really fun way to engage the younger set and teach them about historic preservation, because we're always seeking ways to do that. And they've inspired summits all over the country. We even just recently finished one in Savannah in conjunction with the National Preservation Conference. But Puebla, Colorado held one and actually involved their Preservation Commission. And one of the girls that participated in the program afterwards came up and said, "You have a vacancy on your commission. I would like to be part of your Preservation Commission." So the mayor was a little dumbfounded at first. There was nothing in the rules that said she couldn't. So now they have a 17-year-old on their Preservation Commission, and the staff kind of jokes that she's the most qualified one. But she's engaged. It's the best civics lesson you could ever ask for, and getting youth involved in it. So it's pretty exciting. Another CLG program we've got going on in Maryland is a series of energy audits. And we all know that we have issues with talking about why we know that historic windows perform just as well, but we don't really have the data that the window manufacturers do to back that up. So Maryland funded in 4 communities a series of residential energy audits. So the homeowner got an energy audit. They were provided with recommendations. And then in the next phase, they're now going back and looking at those houses again that they implemented the recommendations and changes, and seeing what the energy savings are. It has really proved to give the SHPO good data on what should and shouldn't happen to a historic building. B, it trained the energy auditors in how to address historic properties. And C, at the local level, the staff at the commission has been able to say to someone that comes in that, "Oh, you want to replace your windows. Well, your neighbor did an energy audit, and these were the findings, so we recommend that you do this first." And so it's really proved very helpful. I mentioned as one of the requirements of a CLG is that we ask that you maintain a survey and inventory. Well, when the 4 Mile Canyon fire hit in Boulder County, the county had not done a survey of all of their historic resources. And so when the fire hit, they really did not know where to direct their resources. So following the fire, using a CLG grant, they went out and surveyed the remaining cultural resources. Well, thankfully they did that, because they were immediately hit with flooding. But because they had surveyed, they had put this information into their comprehensive plans and their emergency disaster planning, they knew exactly where to go. So you can see in this slide that you can see this church up here. Literally, the foundation has been washed out of it. And so they knew then this was a priority resource that they wanted to go back to and save. So Boulder County really has become a leader in disaster planning. And this is something through funding for Katrina and Sandy that we've learned a lot more about in how to help communities be prepared for these disasters. If it's not in your plan, FEMA can't pay for it. So it's pretty important to do those types of things. Training is something that comes up a lot that CLGs are often interested in. And I mentioned the National Alliance of Preservation Commissions. They do a wonderful training called CAMP, Commission Assistance Mentoring Program. If you haven't participated in it, I strongly encourage you to. Through our assistance, they've just revamped all of their course offerings. And so they have some really good new presentations to offer. So do consider that. Another CLG project that we funded in Michigan is job training through rehabilitation of windows. So I think we all have trouble finding someone to work on windows. They've actually gone through and trained about 70 individuals to do window rehab. Lowe's Hardware has donated the tools. So for about $2,000, these individuals can go out and start a career doing wood window rehab. So it's pretty amazing. The Michigan SHPO also recorded a lot of the classes. So if you have any interest in learning how to rehab a window, all that information is available online. And another type of training that we funded, I've kind of put these up here so you guys will have the links to go get more, is in Maryland. We funded some basic training on design assistance and then preservation law. These are free downloads that anyone can go get. You just need to put in your email address. And then there's always regional opportunities. I think states working together is a really interesting way to do things, and being that California is so spread out, maybe working with the Northeast states, or I'm sorry, the Northwest states, and then the ones further south might be an idea. In Arkansas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, they rotate having their Destination Downtown Conference, which is mainly about main streets, but they've started inviting their preservation commissions too, because that partnership is strong when it works together, and something we definitely need to be focusing on a little bit more. And there's also some piloted trainings the Park Service has done. I mentioned quickly the Section 106 training that we built with the state of Georgia. We've also given that in Iowa and looking at doing it in Alabama. That's in partnership with the Advisory Council for Preservation. So if it's something you're interested in, let us know. And we also have developed sustainability and lead training to help preservationists understand what they need to know about those types of things. And that is about all I have for you guys today. This is where to find me, and do know that we try to be have a pretty strong presence on social media under Heritage and Historic Preservation. And every Monday on Facebook is CLG Monday. So if you want to know what's going on throughout the country, just check in on that, and you can see a lot of different programs going on throughout the week for us on Facebook. Thank you guys, and I'll be happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you, Megan, and we can begin with Shannon right away. If you'd like, Shannon, you're unmuted right now.
First, before I even get started, I'd like to take a second to thank both Megan and Ken for participating in this. It's really exciting for the staff at the California Office of Historic Preservation to have this opportunity to work with both our nationwide coordinator and then a staff person at our newest CLG, so we're super excited about that. To begin with, this is just going to be a little bit about the California perspective on the Certified Local Government Program. Historic preservation in California is maybe a little bit different than in some of the states in the East. So I thought I would start out by talking about where the authority for preservation in California comes from. Rather than having statewide legislation that dictates or guides historic preservation, in California what we really have is the police power that is granted to local governments by the California Constitution and has been upheld by California courts that historic preservation is a valid public purpose and is considered or can fall under that police power, as does land use regulations such as zoning. Just kind of a general overview of what a comprehensive preservation program would look like in California. One of the big things, I say here historic preservation element, but really what those of us at the California Office of Historic Preservation would be looking for is preservation represented in your city's general plan. And then, of course, the critical piece is your local ordinance, which would establish your commission, kind of detail your design or your designation process and criteria, establish whether or not you have incentives, such as the Mills Act, or sometimes kind of fee waivers, that sort of thing, and then hopefully also guide your kind of educational and technical assistance programs. So if you're a local government that already is not a certified local government, but you have a comprehensive program, what's next? We would really hope that you would consider the Certified Local Government Program. Oops, pardon me, let me go back if I can. For some reason, my entire slide didn't show up. Basically, this slide was supposed to represent the fact that the Certified Local Government Program is a partnership between the National Park Service, the State Office of Historic Preservation, or the SHPO, and the local government, and together we work to really carry out that federal preservation partnership. But as Megan noted, and I would agree, just would like to echo, we really feel like you at the local level are where the rubber meets the road and the real preservation happens. Oops, let's see, now I'm going the wrong direction on my apologies, guys. The Certified Local Government Program, kind of as it's spelled out or carried out, is obviously, as Megan noted, starts with the National Park Service. They provide the overall rules and the funding comes from National Park Service. The state office really administers the statewide program and serves largely in an advisory role. In fact, when applications come through to us, we're not the ones certifying the local government. We're just making recommendations to National Park Service, who then has the final say. Probably our biggest role once you are part of the program is that our office then will select the grant recipients. We decide who that 10% pass-through goes to. And then local governments, again, are really where the program is carried out. I think kind of an important thing to note is that if you choose to become a certified local government, you do not give up any of your autonomy. NPS, OHP, we don't have any regulatory authority over your local program because you've chosen to become a certified local government. We're just really there saying, yes, your program kind of meets best practices and meets those standards that we were looking for. I guess one of the things that I'd like to touch on that Megan didn't mention much is that for California, our real goal is that through your comprehensive program and through the CLG program, you're demonstrating that you've integrated historic preservation into your overall land use planning, because we found that, a decade, 2 decades ago, oftentimes historic preservation was being sidelined as kind of a secondary issue or need, and land use planning was kind of moving forward, and we were losing a lot of our resources. But when we started having our preservation folks work with and speak the language of planners, we were really able to kind of affect some good preservation decisions along with that land use planning. In California, our CLG requirements are, and my numbers are funny here. My apologies, guys. Our CLG requirements are very similar to, in fact, probably mirror the national expectations, and those are that you at the local level will enforce the state and local laws and regulations for designation and protection of historic properties, that you will establish a historic preservation commission by ordinance, that you'll maintain a system for survey and inventory. That's a very big piece for us. That you do, like Megan said, provide for that public participation in the preservation program, and that you perform the responsibilities delegated to you by the state. And in California, when you become a certified local government, that doesn't automatically mean that we're going to ask you to do anything other than participate in the National Register program and kind of meet these basic requirements. But it does oftentimes provide you the opportunity to say, take on some of the Section 106 role of the SHPO, where we wouldn't necessarily be comfortable delegating that authority, and this would be specifically speaking to HUD programs. We wouldn't be comfortable delegating that authority to a program that we didn't know kind of met best practices, where because you are certified, we're comfortable with your program, we recognize that you'll be making decisions that are in the best interest of your community. California currently has 66 local governments that have chosen to become certified local governments. Last year, we certified Palm Springs and the city of Sonoma. Of the 66 CLGs, there's a broad range of diversity. I threw out a few photos here just to demonstrate. If you'll notice on the upper left, we've got the city of Truckee, which is a fairly small community. Actually, I believe they're the town of Truckee, the only town in California. And then just below it, we've got the city of San Francisco, where we've got downtown Los Angeles coupled with the city of Eureka, and San Diego with the very small town of Colusa. And I used these images just to highlight the fact that, we've got these large urban areas that have large programs. In fact, the city of San Francisco has a staff that I believe exceeds, their historic preservation staff exceeds the number of staff members at the Office of Historic Preservation, where the city of Colusa has one part-time planner that is responsible for carrying out all planning responsibilities for the city, not just historic preservation. And so I often will speak with members or staff members at a local government, and they feel like maybe their program isn't large enough to go through the Certified Local Government program. And I guess I use this just to demonstrate that's not the case. We've got certified local governments of all shapes, sizes, sophistications in California, and we're really kind of thrilled because we think that represents the diversity of our state. There is kind of some common threads that a typical California CLG will have. The first being a well-written and clearly defined historic preservation ordinance. And I'll take this time just to note that while it's not clearly written as a requirement in our California requirements for becoming a certified local government, this is an area where staff members who are reviewing incoming CLG applications will spend a good amount of time working with your local government, working to ensure that your ordinance is clear, logical, and can withstand some challenge if needed. Also, of course, the requirement would be, or the typical CLG will have an active preservation commission. We have a few CLGs that their commissions only meet quarterly, but I would say that most local governments definitely, that most CLGs, their commissions meet monthly. Another big thing, again, for us would be not only that you have an existing inventory, but that you have a systematic process for maintaining and conducting new survey so that you really have a sense of what is out there in your community, what your historical resources are, and then finally that you have a solid plan for public outreach and a process for the public to be involved in your program. This is just a little bit of information about what we'd expect to see in a typical ordinance. I won't bother going through piece by piece, but really just kind of that you've detailed where the authority comes from, your enabling legislation, if you will. It clearly explains your Preservation Commission, establishes the commission, and details the role, the scope of powers that your commission will have. And another big piece is that your designation procedures and criteria are clear. We would strongly recommend that the criteria mirror, at least the first 4 criteria, mirror the National Register and California Register criteria in the sense that that certainly helps to streamline kind of your integration into the larger federal and state kind of laws and process and helps kind of clarify when people have questions. Your Historic Preservation Commission, Megan mentioned that I would speak to kind of the requirements, and really I'll note here that it's our goal, it's our recommendation that you have at least 2 members that meet the Secretary of the Interior's professional qualifications. But beyond that, we don't have any specific expectations or requirements because we recognize that every city is different. It might be more important for a city in a highly urban area like San Francisco to have an architect and a historian or an architectural historian, where in San Bernardino or somewhere in the desert it might be incredibly important that there's an archaeologist on the commission. We also recognize that in some of our smaller cities it's very difficult to even find 2 people that meet the standards, and so that's why this is a should, not shall requirement, because as long as you've done your best to fill those seats and you do have a commission that is seated with people that have a demonstrated interest in preservation, we're comfortable with that. Now, your commission in California may be an advisory body. You may be fortunate to be like the city of San Francisco and actually a city and county of San Francisco and actually have some full decision-making authority. But in most cases in California, it's a combination thereof. You may have some authority over projects as far as whether or not they meet the standards going through the design review process, but only be an advisory body for designation or incentives. That's not uncommon at all. One thing that I should mention here is that while your commission will have a relationship with the Planning Commission, we will no longer certify a program where the Planning Commission acts as the Historic Preservation Commission anymore. We do have 2 certified local governments in the state where that's the case, but we just have found that it's really challenging for them. It provides kind of there's some conflict of interest issues, and we've decided as an office to no longer move forward that way. So what are the benefits of becoming a CLG? I think one of the big things is simply credibility. This may sound silly, but we've heard from many, many communities that, they had a solid, comprehensive historic preservation program before deciding to go through the certified local government process. And suddenly when they became a CLG, it added some real cachet to the program. I think that it simply acknowledges that your program is consistent with federal and state laws, which have stood the test of time. And it does kind of insulate your program as well from any accusation that your decisions are arbitrary or capricious. Streamlining is a big thing. By having a designation process that mirrors the California Register and National Register, it eliminates a lot of question when it comes to the California Environmental Quality Act. And a big thing under, issue with CEQA is that by having a program that routinely uses the Secretary of the Interior standards and for the treatment of historic properties, there are some CEQA exemptions that can be used. In California, again, I'll note that